So when I was a kid, I was attending the church as a kid, and we did this festival every year. I think they called it the Fall Festival, and you can probably guess when it took place. And so it was the fall. But anyway, sorry, I knew it was a hard question, but there was this game that they played called King of the Mountain. Who's ever played King of the Mountain? Raise your hand. Right? Is anyone still injured from it? And so what they had these two sawhorses, and they had this huge log positioned on these sawhorses. And there was padding on the ground, and it was a very simple game. You just had to get on the log, and you couldn't hold on to anything. And then there was another person on the log across from you, and they would say, go, and it was all out war. Like there was no rules. You do whatever you can do to get them off the log without them getting you off the log. And if you've played this, it can be grueling and exhausting, right? And so you're trying to impose your will on them and them on you, and it goes back and forth, and you might be winning for a minute, and you're able to push them around, but then you get tired, and then they kind of push you around, and it's this raw competition, this back and forth struggle where you're trying to control them, and they're trying to control you. And the reason I bring that up is in Matthew chapter 6, the scripture that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, Jesus says something that really makes me think of that game. And so we're going to read it together. It'll be on the screen behind me. It says, in Matthew 6:24, it says, no one can serve two masters. Either you'll hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. In the original language, that word money would have been mammon. And so Jesus here is describing this strange, like king of the mountain type struggle for dominion or control over mammon. And so what Jesus is warning us there is he's like, listen, you are constantly utilizing something in your life that wants to control you. And so you have to learn how to control it so that it doesn't control you. In Genesis chapter 1, God actually gives mankind, humans, stewardship over the entire earth, like the animals, the seas, the plants, the trees. And he tells us to take dominion and to be fruitful with the earth. And so he puts us in charge of his physical creation. And he's like, I want you to arrange it and use it in such a way that it produces flourishing and it honors me. And so this whole dominion and stewardship for us, what this really equals is just like a caretaking oversight. So God has given each of us a caretaker's oversight of his world and all that's in it. And he wants us to produce good things with that oversight, to produce flourishing and to everything that we can take control over, to not dominate it, but to arrange it in such a way that it honors God and that it does his will in the world, right? So just an example, to take dominion over the land would be to arrange it, to aerate it, to remove all of the rocks, and to put the correct minerals in the soil, and to plant seeds and eventually produce crops, to make a big pile of dirt into something useful and fruitful that feeds people and then even produces a broader human flourishing, right? And so then the concern, though, or the instruction from the Lord is that there is this thing that is called mammon in the scriptures that we are told to steward in a way that honors God and to do his will. But even as we're told to steward it, we're warned by Jesus to handle it with care because it has the potential to master us in our lives. And so then the question that I just want to take a minute and kind of walk through and explain is, what is mammon? What does that word really mean that we saw translated in the English as money? What does it really mean? And it simply means material wealth that's been entrusted. So no matter what it is, if I get 20 pounds of grain and I bring it over here to Ken and I say, Ken, here, take this, do something with it, that's mammon, right? If I take $2,000 and I give it to Dominic and I say, Dominic, here, take this, do something useful, that's mammon. And so what mammon simply means is any kind of material wealth entrusted to another. Now, in the modern world, we tend to think of that more as money because we translate our wealth back into money. In the ancient world, they didn't do that as much. They stored their wealth in huge vats of grains, and they had expensive clothes, and your wealth tended to be more contained in physical things than in just denominations of dollars. But that's what the word means. And there's this interesting thing that took place in Jewish culture over time. Originally, it was just called mammon. It was spelled M-A-M-O-N. But over time, mammon came to be known as mammon. And I know it's like, that doesn't make any sense. Look at the screens if you're not looking. And so the M-A-M, and so that's actually spelled wrong up there. Someone spell check caught it. M-A-M, it had one M, M-A-M-O-N, came to be known as M-A-M-M-O-M, mammon. And so here's why they changed it. By adding the extra M and capitalizing it, they were personifying it. Now, some people would read that and go, oh, it's talking about a demon, and it's not. It's actually a literary tool called personification. And so personification gives personal qualities to inanimate objects for the purpose of showing the impact that item can have. And so here's an example. Here's what I mean. If greed influenced someone to commit murder, then personification would talk about it like this. It would say, Mammon killed them. But we know Mammon didn't kill them, right? A person being driven by the love of money and greed killed them. But personification makes it sound personal so that we can understand the effect that it has on us. And so the point of this biblical personification is to let us know the great potential for good or for evil that's wrapped up in wealth. And by doing it and giving it a capitalized first letter, it's making it almost like it's its own character in our story, right? There's you, and there's the things you do, and then there's this thing next to you called mammon that can act in good ways in your story, or it can act in really destructive ways. And so Jesus is warning us here in Matthew 6 that God's leadership in our life can be diluted or even replaced by a love of mammon. That's what he's saying. He's like, listen, this thing can so get a hold of you that you'll think God is Lord and Master in your life, but you might actually be serving stuff instead. And here's the thing. This isn't a change that anyone ever consciously makes. Like, no one goes, you know what, serving Jesus has been pretty good, but I'm changing right now. I'm getting baptized into money, right? Like, we don't just go, no, I'm no longer serving God. I'm now serving a car. I'm now serving my paycheck. I'm now serving a bigger house or whatever. We don't decide that. What happens is what I call devotion migration. And so as we handle mammon, we have this slow but subtle devotion migration where our devotion migrates from the God who gives the mammon to the mammon itself. And it happens because mammon can be pretty good, right? How many of you guys ever put on an outfit that made you feel 100 times better, right? I mean, I did it this morning. I was like, ooh, man. Luke even commented on it. I was like, man, all right. You can do it. You can put something on you and be like, and like you start doing the walk. Staying alive, staying alive. You can tell by the way I use my, whatever it is, and so you can buy some stuff that makes you feel better, right? You can get in a car. How many of you guys, you men, ever got into a car and you're like, this is the day I'm going to find my wife. She's going to see this machine, right? No woman can resist me in this car, right? Like whatever it is. And so there's pleasure that comes from mammon. We can see things, and even not in shallow ways, it can be beautiful. How many of you guys have ever looked at just a house, a collection of bricks or wood and glass, and you looked at it and you thought it was beautiful? Anybody? Yeah, it's okay. Like there's beauty in it. A lot of times we can get certain kinds and certain amounts of mammon, and it can make us feel powerful as individuals. We can be like, yeah, right? And then for some of us, mammon has this effect of giving us a sense of security, where it's like we can get enough of it that we're like, okay, now I'm all right. Nothing can get to me now. And so because of these things, because of the inherent beauty and pleasure and security and power, what happens is a little bit at a time, we develop affection for the mammon rather than the God who entrusts the mammon. Does that make sense? And we just get these little bits of attachments. And what happens is over time, it begins to hold us more than we're holding it. How many of you guys have ever dropped off a toddler at a place they didn't want to be? Anybody, like a place they were afraid to be? Like maybe you took them to kindergarten for the first time, or to the nursery, or you're going to go out on a date and you're trying to drop them off. What happens? Like they're watching, they know you're trying to leave, right? And so they're calm for a minute. And then when you stand up and you hug them, they know the moment of separation is coming. And they grab onto you with every inch and orifice of their body, right? Their fingers wrap up in your clothes or in your hair. Their legs are wrapped around their feet are inside your pockets. They're screaming. Somehow they're holding you even with their neck. How many of you guys have ever had them hold you with their neck, with their midsection, and somehow they can fold in half and just hold you with it, right? And you're holding them and you're hugging them, and you go to put them down and you go like this, and you open your arms and you stand up and they're still completely attached. And you're like, no, this is the part where you get off, right? And so then you try to pull them away and you lose half your hair, right? It's just ripped out. Your clothes are disheveled, right? And it's because they're holding on to you tighter than you're holding on to them. Right? And so like when it comes to mammon, the point that I'm making is you're not the only one holding on. And there's this subtle thing that happens as we handle it. We grab it, and then it grabs us. And we decide it's time to let it go and drop it off somewhere, and someone needs something, and we're like, here. And it's just like, no, bring me with you, keep me. And it just hangs on to us. And so the problem is that we never see that as like greed or as a love of mammon. Because when we think about a love for mammon or greed, we think of outrageous extremes, don't we? We think of like Scrooge McDuck swimming in a sea of his money. How many of you guys grew up watching that? And you're like, when I can do that, that's when I'll be rich. That's when, that is being too into your stuff, right? But the truth is, a love for mammon for normal people looks much more subtle, doesn't it? And I'm sure there are extremes where people are just that ridiculously over the top rich. But what does it look like in our life? And so Jesus has this interesting encounter with a person that really shines light on this whole thing. In Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 15, Jesus is in front of a crowd of people and he's teaching. And it says this, someone in the crowd said, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" And then he said to them, the whole crowd, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." This is a really interesting scenario because any of us probably would have been like, yeah, Your brother's being selfish. He's breaking the law. He's supposed to give you your percentage, right? And we would have said, well, no, the brother's being selfish. You're not. The brother loves money. You don't. And instead of doing that, Jesus doesn't argue the case. Jesus shocks everyone by warning this man and the crowd by extension about the sneakiness of greed. And he's like, listen, you have to be so careful because mammon is able to disguise itself as more acceptable things. It dresses up as things like a concern for justice. And so here you are pounding your chest. And it's like, it's just the right thing though, Bob. They're supposed to be doing it. And the truth is, justice wasn't what was driving this brother. He had come to believe and expect that he was owed a certain amount of mammon. And when it didn't come to him, it twisted his heart and it began to drive him. And he decided in that moment, by humiliating his brother in front of this crowd, that he would rather have the mammon than have his brother. It's just really that simple. And so Jesus is warning, he's like, listen, guys, mammon dresses up as other things. And so it requires us to do a lot of digging in our hearts to know what's really going on in any moment in time. It's kind of like that king of the mountain struggle. And Jesus is saying, listen, right now, you're on your heels. Mammon is controlling you. It's causing you to do damage in your family. Now, it was rightfully so. It was controlling his brother too, wasn't it? Like they were both being controlled. They were both willing to jeopardize their own families over some mammon. And I just wonder, not that specific scenario with inheritances, but I just wonder, how often am I that guy? How often do I tell myself that what I'm fighting for, what I'm contending for is so much more noble, but the truth is mammon has a hold of my heart, and it's directing me, and it's twisting me, and it's causing me to say things and do things and get bent out of shape in different directions. And so I want to be clear, and we said this last week, and we're going to go way more into this next week. Stuff is not bad. God entrusted us with the physical world, with mammon. It's actually a remarkable blessing. Right, and we're going to go into the fact that he wants to pour out blessing. There's all kinds of scripture that talks about him. And he's saying, listen, it's going to run over you. You're not going to be able to, it's going to fall into your lap and it's going to be over your shoes. He wants to pour out blessing. Right, so it's not that stuff is bad, but we have to be careful because of our sinful, needy hearts. And so we have these sinful, broken, needy hearts. And so as we steward mammon, it's able to attach itself to those needy places in our hearts. It scratches an itch that should be scratched by God, whether it's an itch for security, an itch for significance, an itch for some other kind of thing. And it gets masqueraded and it gets in there and it gets a hold of us. And so then the question that I want to deal with, the bulk of what we're going to do here in the next few minutes, is how do we disentangle our hearts from mammon, even as we continually use it? Because you can't get away from it. You've been entrusted with it by God. So you're constantly stewarding it. You're constantly handling it. And so this process is always playing out. So how do we keep our hearts disentangled from it? And this is what Jesus taught about this. And just so that you know, we're just still basically doing the teacher series. We're teaching straight through Matthew. This is the next verse that came after what we talked about last week. And so we're just reading straight through this, the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 6, we're going to read verses 21 through 24, but this is coming right on the heels of what we talked about last week, where he said, do not store up treasures on earth where moth and vermin destroy, but store up treasures in heaven. And then he says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And we're using a different translation this week called the Contemporary English, because this is a very unique metaphor that Jesus uses to teach here. And I think that this translation hits it really well. And so verse 21 says, your heart will always be where your treasure is. And then he says this, your eyes are the window for your body. When they are good, you have all the light you need. But when your eyes are bad, everything is dark. If the light inside you is dark, you surely are in the dark. Now, this is really strange. You're like, Bob, how on earth does this talk about money and mammon? And I'll explain it. So he's talking about houses and windows. In the first century, the modest Jewish home would typically have one window that was open into the main living room of the house. And they didn't have electric light. And so the way that you got light in your house during the day was by this window, okay? And so the bigger your window, the more what you had? Light. Very simple. You guys understand this. So you'd position it just right. And if you wanted to have a really bright house, you needed to have a really big window, right? And so it's really, really simple so far. But here's the balance. Here was the struggle. Is that the bigger your window, the less security you had. So you could have lots of light. Your house could be a really usable space and you could see in there to do all these things and have lots of fresh air. But if you were nervous that someone was going to steal your stuff, what you would typically do is build a house with a what? A smaller window. And so you could tell how nervous someone was about their stuff by how big or how small their window was. And so you look at this house and you'd be like, oh man, I guess they are more worried about their stuff than they are about light in their house. And this was the balance and the exchange that everyone was living with. And so Jesus uses this really common practice that everyone understood, and he relates the house to us as our life, and he relates the window to the eye or to our outlook on life, our general disposition. And so when he uses that word, if the window is good, that word good actually literally meant big or generous. So if you have a big, generous window or a big, generous outlook on life, then your life is full of light. And the word for a bad window was actually small, tight-fisted, and stingy, hard-hearted, right? And so if your outlook on life is stingy, tight-fisted outlook, hard-hearted, like everyone's just trying to take from me, and I'm gonna have to defend my stuff, right? If that's your outlook on life, then he's like, you are going to be full of darkness. And so just to summarize the metaphor, Jesus is just saying, listen, when your general disposition in life is generous, your life is full of light. When your general disposition is a stinginess, a tight-fistedness, a hard-heartedness, then you're stuck in darkness. So he's saying, listen, if you want to keep mammon off your back, if you want to live a life that's full of the light of God, the key practice is generosity. And so deliberate generosity loosens mammon's grip on our hearts, and it fills us with the light of God. Going back to the kid that's scared to be dropped off, that you have to drop off, right? When you get there and it's time and they're grabbing on and they don't want to let go, how do you fix that? By leaving them there, right? That's the only way. You got to be like, sorry, and then you leave. And they get over it, and they become okay. And then the next time there's a problem again, but it's a little bit easier. And now it's like, you don't bleed when you let them go this time. And then you get away, right? And eventually it's like, they're teenagers, and they're like, you don't see them for days, and they don't need you at all, right? And then you try to give them a hug, and they're like, yeah, Mom, And so it just changes. My clothes are coming off up here. It just changes over time. But what happens if they grab onto you and you give in? And you pick them back up and you go, okay, we'll go home then, Junior. Right? You've trained them to never, ever let go. You've reinforced that attachment. And that's what's essentially Jesus is teaching us. When we generously let go of our stuff, we break its constant attachment to us. And we have to regularly do this because we're regularly and constantly handling stuff. right? And so some of us are like, yeah, well, I'll be generous if the moment hits me. And the problem is those moments are unreliable and they hardly ever happen, but you're constantly handling and embracing mammon. So because we handle mammon constantly, random generosity isn't enough to break its hold. We need regular practices, or what I would call habits of generosity. And this is why the Bible teaches the practice of the tithe and the offering. And they're two separate things, and we'll kind of just talk quickly about that. But the tithe is simply just returning to God the first tenth of everything he entrusts to your stewardship. Right? You're just going, you know what, God? Thank you for all of this you've entrusted to me. Here's this first tenth that I give back to you because you've instructed it. And the tithe was given first. I want to be clear, like it's not leftovers, and there's a reason that it's given first. Right? Because if you do everything else first and then you see what's left over and you give it, what that trains you to do is to depend on your stuff, doesn't it? But if you go first and you say, here, God, this is for you, then you train yourself, hey, my dependence is on God. I need him. I need his blessing more than I need this stuff, right? And so on top of that, so if I get paid and before I pay my bills, if I tithe to the Lord, then what I'm doing with that act and the order that it's happening in is I'm making his will and his work first in my life in the most practical way I'm able to. So in a very real way, I'm saying, God, your work is first in my life. And so it's the first portion of what I receive. I'm investing back in that. And if I do that every time I have an increase or get paid, then every time I'm handling mammon, what am I doing? I'm putting God first. I'm refusing to allow my attachment to it to become first in my life. And so I'm slapping its hands every time it tries to grab a hold of me. I'm like, don't grab me. I told you. And so it's like, if you even imagine as you're giving, it's like you're putting mammon in its place and you're telling it, listen, you're going to go where I tell you. You're not going to call the shots. And so now here's the thing though, like for me, my parents taught me this practice when I was a kid. And if you've been tithing for any period of time, you know this, it becomes pretty normal pretty quickly. And it's no longer an act of faith. It's no longer an act of sacrifice because you see the constant blessing. Like anyone that tithes would tell you, yes, God's blessing has been on our life and we've had so much more based on the 90% than we ever would have had on the 100% because God's blessing was on our life. And so for me, it's never a temptation where it's like, you know what, maybe I should just not tithe. It's like, no, if I'm in need, I need to be faithful to the Lord because he responds. And so then what happens then is the offering becomes the new sacrifice. And so the offering is this thing that's beyond the tithe where it's like, hey, I tithe regularly, but the Lord has been good to me and I want to really just give to him in a special way. Well, that would be an offering. And I want to be clear, offerings can be anything and it can be lots of different things all at once. And it doesn't necessarily need to be linked to the church. And so if you're tithing and all of a sudden you know this friend that's really in need and you step in a big way and you help them, that's an offering to the Lord, right? And or if you do the car and you're like, hey, I'm going to do this commitment and make this offering to the Lord, that's an offering to the Lord. Like giving to a charity or a community effort that you believe in, if your heart is before the Lord as you, that's an offering to the Lord. Right? And so there's lots of ways this happens, right? But whatever it is, all of these, what they are at their core, is they're acts of deliberate generosity. It's you dropping the kid off at a place it doesn't want to be, and you training them to listen to you rather than you being directed by them. And so what this does is it keeps the fingers of mammon from closing around our hearts and being able to begin to steer and direct us. Because the truth is, so many of us live so much of our life being directed by the fingers. And the mammon is telling us where to go, what to do, how to feel, who to be mad at, who to vote for, everything, right? It's trying to direct us in everything. And so what we do is we get its fingers loosened for periods of time and we tell it what we're going to do rather than vice versa. And on top of that, every time we give, like we are sowing seeds of a generous heart and disposition in our lives. Now, I want to clear up a couple of questions because there might be people here who would say, well, Bob, I thought that maybe the tithe was just an Old Testament thing back when they had all the rules, and now that we're in the New Testament, and so I would say that I understand that position, but I would disagree for a few biblical reasons. And so just to help you, if anyone ever asks you that question, I'll even show them to you. So first of all, tithing actually came before the Old Testament law. So if you look at Abraham in Genesis 14 tithed, and that was 430 years before the Old Testament law on tithing. So it came before. If you look at Jacob tithed in Genesis 20, or he commits or vows to tithe, that's 400 years before the Old Testament law commanded tithing. You look at Cain and Abel, the brothers at the very beginning. What were they doing? What were they fighting over? They were fighting over their offerings to the Lord. So it preceded the Old Testament law, right? And so then when the Old Testament law came about, the Old Testament law codified this practice that had already been around. And so if you look at Leviticus 27, it clearly lines out the tithe. Numbers 18, Deuteronomy 12, Nehemiah 10. I won't go into all this and read it. And then there's the classic one that you probably hear more in church if you've been in church very long, Malachi chapter 3, verses 10 and 11. It say this, and the reason I wanted to read this one is it really kind of paints the whole picture of not just our giving, but God's blessing that flows from it. It says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. We talked about this last week. The storehouse would be the church. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be enough room to store it. And listen to how he describes the blessing for the tithe. I'll prevent pests from devouring your crops, and vines in your fields will not drop their fruit before it is ripe, says the Lord. So it's this protection, this divine protection on your interests. And so the reason I say all that is just to make the clear biblical case that the tithe actually came. So if here's the Old Testament law, the tithe came before the Old Testament law. The tithe was codified in the Old Testament law. So then the question is, did the tithe continue in the New Testament? And I'll say yes, and I'll give you 3 quick scriptures just to kind of back that up. But Matthew chapter 23, verse 23, Jesus is speaking with the Pharisees, and he reinforces the tithe. You can go look it up if you want. But 1 Corinthians 16:2, Paul is instructing the church to set aside a certain amount of money on the Sabbath day, and he uses these words, in proportion to your income. Now, he's not saying the word tithe, but if it's in proportion to your income, then that would be some kind of percentage-based giving. And then again in 2 Corinthians 8:11, he's talking to the church again. And they'd actually been giving, but he says this interesting thing. He says to complete their generosity, to complete their giving, and do it according to their means. And so now he's again linking what they're giving to what they're making and saying, listen, this is what this tithing and this pattern of biblical generosity is giving according to your means. And so again, we're not going to harp on this forever. I just wanted to clearly lay this out. We don't often take time to go through all of these scriptures and explain it. So hopefully that's enough to make it clear that the case for the tithe is that it came before the Old Testament. It was codified in the Old Testament, and it was reinforced and continued on in the New Testament. But here's what this all boils down to, is that Jesus said, where our treasure is, our heart is going to be also. So as we give, we talked about this a lot last week, we're investing our hearts in very tangible ways. We're investing our daily lives in God's work. And so our love for God becomes very practical and very tactile when it spills into this area. And we talked at the beginning of this message about the fact that God has given humans stewardship of the earth. That our whole assignment in this world is summed up in this idea that we're to take control or take dominion of the physical world. And our role is to arrange it and to steward it in a way that we make it honor God and we make it serve His will in the world. And so this whole thing is all about dominion and stewardship. It's about all of us stepping into this role that God designed us for, to be shaped by Him, and then to shape all of creation in accordance with our understanding of Him. And so the reason I say this, and I've got some friends coming out in here in a minute, they're going to help me with this, but when we learn dominion in our money, it can be applied. There we go. So they're excited to be up here. They were asking me, can we be on the stage this week while you're talking? And so when we learn dominion in our money, right, we actually can apply that to other areas of our lives. And so if you look, behind these guys is the cross, right? And their attention's going other places, they're wandering, and each of these represents significant areas of our life that we're given to take ownership and dominion of and to make it face Christ. And so even in this practice of giving, we're able to get a hold of our mammon and we're able to make it face the cross and become obedient to Jesus. And we take this significant area of our life and we learn dominion in it. And as we do that, it actually trains us to be able to take dominion of other areas of our life and make it face Jesus, make it obey Him. I made Karen wear this one so it would be less awkward, right? So we make it face the cross. And so our attitudes might be the toughest ones to get dominion of. And so we make it face. And see, here's the thing. How many of you guys know that you can get something under control for a minute, but it'll get away from you? Anybody? And so you have to reestablish dominion in areas of your life in an ongoing way. I told you Karen was going to be a problem, right? She's trying to leave. All right. And now the final frontier, all right? This is both a sermon on attitudes and parenting. All right. There we go. Finally. Now here's the point of this, right? I know that sometimes they're like, oh, they just, the church talking about money. Like, ultimately, like, why is mammon such a gateway? It's not because it's the easiest thing in our life, but it's like super clear and it's quantifiable. You can count it. So you can look at it and go, is my devotion to God represented here? Like, is it there? Right? And so you can look at it and know and go, okay, let me adjust this, let me do that. And it's really clear as you grab dominion there. But what you're actually doing isn't dollars and cents, it's your heart, isn't it? You're getting control of desires and inclinations and appetites. And the training you get in doing that can be applied to every area of our life. And I love the one about relationships. And I'll mention this and then I'm done. But basically, recently we did a 50-year wedding anniversary for one of our couples here. And they did a vow rededication. But they changed their vows because they said, with the time that we have left on this earth, our priority is that our relationship together would be used completely for advancement of God's kingdom. That our whole purpose in each other is to empower each other to serve God to the greatest of our ability with the time that we have left. And that's what it is to take dominion in that area. And so it's so much more than just money. It's stewardship of the whole thing. In the book of Revelation, there's this scene where it says, you guys can go, thanks, where it says that there was the 24 elders. And when the beasts worshiped and the creatures worshiped, that the 24 elders who represent all of mankind, the 24 elders took off their crowns and they placed them on the ground before the Lord. And what that represents, the crown represents the dominion that we've taken. That God gave us stewardship, and we took dominion, and we ordered our whole lives to face the cross. And it wasn't about our power, it was about his sovereignty. And so we got control of it. We wrangled it all in, and then we set it before the King. And listen, we have to be real. This is about grace, and it's about God's goodness, and it's not about our perfection. And all of us, we will spend the rest of our lives running these things down and getting them back in line before the King. But what a beautiful thing as we think about living our lives, taking our crowns, and making them face the Lord. Let's pray together. Father, I'm so grateful for your love and grace. And I'm grateful that you've put so much confidence in us, that you've put so much. I mean, we're in a time in the world where we have access to more than people have ever had access to. And with the means that are at our disposal for the advancement of your kingdom are so great. And I pray that you would give us the wisdom, the power, and the gumption to take dominion in these lives that you've given us, over these means that you've given us, and that we would live lives all around that are in service to your kingdom and not to ourselves. God, I'm thankful for that. I pray that you would speak words of life and hope and peace to us as we walk with you through this ongoing process. In Jesus' name.